Hi, today we are going to be gluing the strips around the mold to create the form of the canoe. Before we do that, we need to create our scarf joints. Um, I've decided to create the scarf joints as I go along and glue each strip on. I think that'll be easier and be less mundane than having to scarf joint everything and then glue it all together at once. So what we're going to do is we will glue up the first and last strip. So we'll put a strip on each side at the same time, and we'll glue those on, and they'll come up all the way up until they meet in the middle, which will actually be the bottom of the canoe because it's upside down. So what we're going to do is create a jig to basically cut those scarf joints at an angle. We're going to do about 60-degree cut for the scarf joint. And how we're going to do that is I'm going to clamp my belt sander upside down on the table, and then I'll create a jig that's at an angle to that belt sander, and I'll just slide the strips down to the belt sander. It's at a 60-degree angle, so it'll cut that angle on each strip end, and then we'll basically join them together and make them all full length so that they stretch from end to end of the canoe. On one of my sunrise walks down by the river, I happened to come across an 8-ounce lead fishing weight, and I thought this is a great opportunity for me to really just set in stone this idea that I have for this project. And I thought, what a great reminder of what my end goal will be. So I think what I'm going to do is create a little display box for this. I'll give it a little foam bed to sit on, and we will keep this in view every day until we get to the keel part of our cutter. So this will be the first piece of lead that will go into the keel. I'm not a superstitious person by any means, but this will definitely be my motivator to continue this project and to see it to completion. I would like to inform everybody that doesn't already know, I have officially been accepted to the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building, and I'm very excited about this and a little nervous. I have a lot of planning to do, a lot of things to prepare for. I live in East Tennessee, and the school is in Northwest Washington State. So I have a long way to go and a lot of stuff to take with me. So I've got a lot to prepare for sure. Yep, that's an airplane. So I know it's bright outside, and this isn't the final pattern, but this is kind of my idea, and I've got a little friend up here talking to us. But so I noticed when I cut my boards up, I had one cypress board that was slightly darker than the rest. You see this board here is a little more reddish color, and I thought, that would be a nice transition between the cypress and the Spanish cedar. So I put that between the two, and it'll help blend in the colors. I'm thinking I actually will put this cypress at the shear line, and the reason for that is I'm going to have mahogany stems, and I want that contrast above the water. So I've decided to keep the cypress at the top and have it fade into the darker Spanish cedar at the bottom. But yeah, that's kind of the basic pattern I'm going to go with. And this guy is very vocal. Where'd he go? There he is. That's the basic pattern that we're going to have. So each side is going to be atop the shear line, one side and the other side. And then as it comes towards the middle, this is the bottom of the boat. So I have that dark fade. I wish you could smell that. So good. All right, so if you haven't figured it out yet, woodworking consists of a lot of building your own tools so that you can get the job done. And that is usually by creating your own jigs to create certain angles, cuts, and all kinds of other things with the wood that you're working with. So right now we're going to work on a scarf joint jig, and I think the best way we're going to do that is I'm going to use this old belt sander that I've got, and I'm going to build a little box that's got an angle at the top. And what that'll do is I'll have an angled piece for my material to sit on, and all I got to do is turn the belt sander on, run my strip down this piece, hold it nice and steady, and then let that sand and angle on that strip so that I can flip it and do the same thing on another strip, and then glue those pieces together to create one long strip that will span all the way across the canoe. So, all right, so now we're going to trace the angle that the strips are going to be laying as they go onto the belt sander. So I'm going to take my speed square and I'm going to do a 60-degree angle on that scarf joint. So what I want to do is put my pivot point down to this mark that I've put just above where the belt sander lies, and then I'll find the 60-degree mark, which is here. I'll make a little mark there, and I'll just take a straight edge and just mark that all the way across. And then when I lay this 2x4, which is basically my track, on that line, I'll get a 60-degree angle when I feed those strips onto the belt sander. Now I need to make another line on this piece, but I don't want to do the same angle on the same side. I want to do it on the opposite side so that when I bookmark these, then they'll match. So I'm going to do the same thing over here, this direction, and then flip it over, put my track piece in between, sandwich it together, and then attach it to the base. Now I'm going to cut out a little bit of an angle from this 2x4. So instead of butting it up against the end right here and having all this space to allow that strip to bend, I want to overhang as close as possible to this flat level piece of the belt sander. So I'm going to cut out enough of a void so that this will reach over the belt and get as close to that plate as I can so that there's less of a gap under the strip. Alright, so I've got these angles drawn out on my track piece, and this is the part that I'm going to be cutting out. So I'm going to take my jigsaw and cut along these two lines here and get rid of that piece so that this track will hang over my belt sander. All right, so I've been talking to some guys online about doing all these scarf joints, and originally I was going to create a jig to glue them all together at once, and I was asking around on what other guys' opinions were, what they had done, and the easiest way to do that. A couple of them were saying to just butt joint them. I don't really want to do that. I don't want to run the risk of getting any kind of gap, even if I'm careful, because I don't want any light coming through. I don't want to be seen, and I don't want, when I put that resin on, I want it to be less likely to suck in that resin and create a little dimple in those little gaps. So I'd like to give some kind of scarf joint and give it an angle so that it has a little more seamless look. I think it would be a little bit stronger as well, and so I'm going to go ahead and do that. But I had another person say that it would be easier to glue them on the molds while you're putting them basically in the bottom strips that you're gluing it to, and scarf joint it there instead of gluing them all up and then putting them on the mold. So I might try that at first, see if that works. I don't have any major bends or anything like that, so I don't think it'll be an issue. But I am going to scarf joint and glue the first and last strip. So I've got the first one here, and the last one is down here, and I'm going to go ahead and glue those up right now and then put them on the mold tomorrow and figure out my shear line and start carving up the stems to get those shaped and ready to take on the next strips. But the important thing when I'm gluing these together is I want to make sure that the strips I'm scarf jointing are matching. So I've got this spare piece that has a similar grain pattern as the number one strip, and the same thing over there on the last one. Now, a smart person would have kept each board together so that they had that option. And in my haste, I kind of piled everything together, so I kind of lost the organization of all these strips. So I've had to go through and kind of restack some of them and try to match them up. But they're close enough in color. The grain's a little tighter in some, but the color's pretty spot on for most of these. So I don't think it'll be too much of a problem. I just want to make sure that grain pattern is at least close when I scarf joint these pieces. So. Okay, so before we can put the strips on, we need to shape the stem. So right now it is just square. It's got right angles, and this sacrificial batten that I've got, it only touches this corner. That's not enough surface to glue to, and it will create gaps on the inside of the hole. So what we need to do is shave off angles on this corner and the opposite corner so that this side will also lay flat, and that way will give us a nice big glue surface, and it'll give the strips a better attachment to the stem, and it'll look much nicer. Also, cutting that in allows us to bring the stem inward so that when we lay the outer stem on top, the outer stem actually butts up against the ends of the strips, and that covers that end grain, and it looks much nicer once it's all finished. So we're not going to cut the same angle from the top of the canoe all the way back here to the keel line, because as you'll see, the molds curve like this. So that's going to create what's called a rolling bevel. So you'll start at a steep angle here, and as you come up, that angle is going to shift. So as you're going up, it's going to turn like this until all the way up to the top here. Those strips will almost be laying flat on top of this stem here. Not perfectly, but it'll be a lot less steep of an angle once we get up here. So what we got to do is use this batten as we go. We're just going to do small sections, maybe about 6 inches at a time, and then we'll lay on a few strips, and then we'll do another 6 inches, lay on a few more strips, and so on until we get all the way to the top. And that way we don't overcompensate and cut too much out as we go up. So we'll just start off with a little bit at first. Now it's also important to make sure that the middle has a uniform thickness all the way from top to bottom. So we left a 1/8 inch thick line down the center of the stem. And when I'm cutting my corners, I don't want to go past those outside lines. So I want to stay away from this center line. Now I got to take more off the back again. As long as we don't shave any more on this edge, we'll be fine. Now we need to tilt it back this way. Well, mistakes were made. So as you can see, I've got some gaps here. At first I thought I'd cut these out incorrectly, the wrong size, or space them wrong somehow. But I think what I did was, when I laid my strip down to glue it up, I didn't clamp it all the way up against the molds. So I notice, so if I twist this and put tension on it, it closes up that gap. So I think what I did was I just made them too long. So now I need to cut this out and re-glue it after I pull all the tension out. And this time I'm going to clamp each station so that that strip is all the way up against it and nice and tight all the way from stem to stem. But I just want to show you guys real quick how I plan on clamping these strips together. So as you can see, the bottom strip, this first one that I started with, it's already set in place. I've got it hooked in here with this little piece of plywood, and that's screwed in semi-permanently. This other piece of plywood is temporary. As you can see, I've got a clamp on it, and so we'll have to move this up for each strip that we glue into place. Now, when I glue the strips together, I want to make sure I get a nice good clamp in there, and I don't want to damage the edge of this cove side by clamping it down with a flat piece of wood. So what I'm going to do is I've got this clamped to the station, this L-shaped piece of plywood here, and I've cut out some angled pieces of the bead side, the bead edges. And what I'll do is there's a little bit of a gap there. You can see that. This wedge, I'm going to drive it in here. And as I tap that wedge in, it should clamp this strip to the lower strip that it's gluing to. So I'll just tap this in, and you can see that gap that was between these two strips is now gone. So we'll take this back off, we'll put a bead of glue in the cove edge of this bottom strip, and then we'll clamp all these down and wedge them up so they're nice and tight and get a good seal. All right, so up until this point, as you can see, I've been alternating both sides as I go up the side of the canoe. But now that the inner stem is completely covered, I'm starting to get over this empty space. So now what I'm going to do is switch gears, and I'm going to complete one side before I start on this side again. And the reason for that is I can cut a little bit extra length so that there's some overhang over the center line here, and then I'll get all the way up to the middle, and then I'll run a straight line down the center and then cut that, and then I'll bring this side up to meet right in the middle. And that should be a little bit easier than trying to fiddle with getting these wedged in perfectly each time I glue the strips. So far everything's going pretty well. Pretty excited. All right, so now we finally have one side done, at least on the bottom of the canoe. I still need to add these strips up here to make this curvature on the shear line. But right now we're just focusing here, and now I need to cut a line down the center. I think I'm just going to lay a chalk line down from end to end, snap it, and then I'll cut it just outside the line, and then I'll use my block plane to kind of bring it all down and get it as straight as possible. And then we'll start laying this side. Is that right, Maddie? All right, so instead of the sloppy chalk line, I just grabbed the old batten that I had going across the center line originally. Now it's not as long as it was because I didn't think I was going to use it again, so I trimmed it up as I was putting these strips on. But now I'm going to use it as a straight edge to mark my center line. And since it doesn't go all the way to the end, I've got this really long straight edge that kind of bends. So I lined it up with the center line on the stem here and matched it to the edge of that strip there. So did that on both ends. Now I'm going to mark my line, and then I'm going to cut it a little proud over the line, like I said, and then ease my way into the center line with the plane, just so I make sure I get all that nice and even, because I want the other side to match the strips. So where they come together, I don't want them to be offset. Not too much. I'm probably not going to get it exactly perfect, but I'd like it to look balanced on both sides. So wish me luck. Not bad. It was a little nerve-wracking, but went through it pretty quickly. Now, of course, it's not perfectly straight, as you can see. So now I'm going to come through with the planer and get it all flat.
right, that's about as straight as I'm gonna get it. So now it's time to start gluing this side. But whereas before I could just lay the strips and let them overhang the stem, now I'm gonna have to cut the strips before I lay them in. So I'm gonna have to cut this angle and then slide it in there and do the same on that end, do a dry fit, make sure it all fits nicely, and then glue it up. So it'll take a little longer to get this section than it did to that section, but not too bad. Okay, so I'm getting to my whiskey strip now, but this one is, once it sits inside the previous strip, there's probably still going to be a little sliver left. So what I might do is just glue two pieces in together, take another piece and glue it in this cove. That way it fills that void, and then I'll just rip most of the second strip out and just leave that little 1/16 of an inch sliver that I need to fill the rest of that gap. So I'll glue those pieces together, let them sit, and then I'll shape it for this little hole here, and then we'll be ready. All right, so I've seen a couple of different methods of this whiskey strip installation. I'm going to try something I just saw that makes sense. Been going back and forth. It's kind of making me nervous, but I got to do it. Got to try it out. I can't just leave a hole there. So what he did was basically, instead of marking it up like this and trying to get a straight line, flipped it. Flip these two pieces over, and then you mark the curvature on the sacrificial side, because when you flip it back to the right orientation, when you put that in, it's drawn as a curve, but when you bend it, it'll bend back to a flat line. So we're going to try that method and see if we can get that to work. He was using strips with flat edges instead of bead and cove, and those are a little more forgiving when you're putting those strips in and out of the gaps. They do a lot less damage, so we have to be very careful when sizing this up. So I'm just going to mark the ends of the gap here and here, and then I'll go under and trace that curvature. Okay, we've got it dry fit right now. It looks a little lumpy, but once we put all the straps down and secure that, it'll flatten it out and pull those gaps in a little bit. So I think I'll be happy with that. Fingers crossed.
I'd say we're done. Well, done with the bottom. We still have to do the stern and the bow, the shear line strips as well. So, but you know, most guys celebrate this as their whiskey strip. Typically with a whiskey strip, you know, you have a nice little glass of whatever spirit you're partial to. But he's too young, and I'm not drinking right now, so we'll just make ourselves a cup of tea. So, skål. Still good. Sorry for the wait. I know it took a long time to get this video out. You know, life happens. I have another job and other hobbies and stuff too, and family to take care of. But we got there eventually, and we'll just keep on trucking. Keep adding things here and there when we can, and eventually have another video out. Hopefully sooner than this one was. But if you're interested, I do have a GoFundMe out. Just search Canoe to Cutter on GoFundMe. It's just to help pay for some school costs, tuition, and tools and stuff that I need for class. I have applied for the Pell Grant and some other scholarships as well, and I'm hoping that those will go through, but this will certainly help me take care of a lot of those extra expenses, because it's going to be a busy year. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Is it good?
Mm-hmm.